The year is 1791, and two residents of Ipswich, England, have decided they are no longer husband and wife. There is just one small problem. However, they cannot get a divorce, thanks to a combination of prohibitive laws and entrenched social stigma. Divorce was a luxury reserved for the rich and well-connected. For most English couples like these two, there were only two options. But some scholars have argued that wife-selling was not so much a survival of archaic custom as a distinctly modern response to the harsh realities of 18th and 19th century life. As English common law offered no affordable means of dissolution for ordinary couples, wife-selling emerged as an alternative, a kind of extra-legal divorce favored by the disenfranchised majority. Women were generally not permitted to initiate the sale or choose their new partner, though some might have actively participated in arranging the transaction. Others appear to have taken on the role of shrew, loudly protesting their fate and denouncing their former husbands. Newspapers across the 18th and 19th centuries gleefully reported on these events, often embellishing the details and highlighting the salacious elements for readers to. This coverage both shaped public perception and reinforced the practice. After all, the effectiveness of wife-selling depended on the transaction being publicly acknowledged and ratified. Thank you especially to our supporters for making videos like this one possible. And if you would like to support us, please visit our support page. All the best, and see you next time. Sensationalist newspaper reports helped ensure that this happened. Wife-selling peaked in popularity during the Industrial Revolution, when rapid urbanization and industrialization created vast new centers of impoverished working-class populations. As families were torn apart and traditional communities disrupted, the practice flourished in crowded cities like Manchester and Liverpool. At its height in the 1840s and 50s, wife-selling was big business for journalists and onlookers alike. Spectators might pay admission for a local theater production by bringing a wife to sell, and the custom was occasionally exploited for political purposes, as when a group of young Chartists presented a candidate for mayor with a bill of divorce granted through the sale of his wife. Yet it's important to recognize that not all wives were helpless victims. And in 1857, the Matrimonial Causes Act made divorce more accessible for the middle class, by removing the requirement for parliamentary approval. While it did little to aid the poor, this reform did offer an alternative path to dissolution. As such, wife-selling gradually fell out of favor, but not before persisting in rural areas for several more decades. The last recorded instance took place in 1907 in Norfolk. In an age when women lacked property rights and economic independence, wife-selling might have represented an opportunity to secure better circumstances for herself and her children. England in the 18th and 19th centuries was a deeply stratified and unequal society, and wife-selling emerged as a means for marginalized individuals to exercise a degree of agency and navigate impossible circumstances. While it was never a perfect or equitable solution, it nonetheless provided an outlet for dissolving bad or abusive marriages. Moreover, the prevalence of wife-selling among working-class communities should remind us that even the most seemingly quaint traditions had real and often painful consequences for those living on the margins. Beneath the public spectacle of the sale lay the messy reality of human relationships, complete with love, loss, betrayal, and hope. In a society that denied women basic rights and left the majority of its population without legal recourse, wife-selling was a desperate but necessary innovation, a way for ordinary people to carve out some measure of autonomy and forge their own paths to freedom. A woman who found herself shackled to a violent or abusive husband, for example, could benefit from the sale, even if she had little voice in directing it. It's therefore possible that some sales resulted from years of pent-up resentment and frustration, and there are numerous anecdotal accounts of women who, once freed from unwanted unions, expressed relief and even happiness with their new situations. In at least one case, a woman named Elizabeth, having been sold for 20 shillings, reportedly returned to her original husband several weeks later claiming, "I've tried him and he is not fit to live with." In a patriarchal society that denied women independent, economic or legal standing, it also provided a degree of agency, allowing women to shed unwanted unions that offered little but misery. While some sales involve payment in money or goods, others call for more unusual forms of compensation, such as ale or beer. In fact, the exchange often resembled a boisterous tavern wedding celebration, complete with music, feasting, and merriment. This was particularly true in working-class communities where public houses were central to social life. One case in Manchester in 1838 involved a husband selling his wife to a pubkeeper in exchange for 10 gallons of beer, 5 shillings, and a silver watch. Such transactions demonstrate not only the casual, almost festive atmosphere that surrounded wife-selling, but also the deep entanglement between the custom and broader cultural norms. Stay in the loveless or possibly abusive marriage, or leave covertly and try to make a new life alone. Historians have uncovered hundreds of accounts of wife-selling, yet surprisingly little systematic study has been done on the practice itself. Most of what we know comes from newspapers, church records, and local histories that noted these events as they happened. These sources suggest that wife selling was a widespread yet variable custom. Transactions took place all across England, from the industrial centres of Manchester to the rural villages of Worcestershire. Men sold their wives for a variety of reasons, including genuine dissatisfaction, infidelity, and, yes, even abuse. Some sales appear to have been entirely consensual, with both partners freely agreeing to part ways. In others, the husband may have made the decision unilaterally, though not necessarily out of cruelty or selfishness. Life in the late 18th and 19th centuries was often harsh and unforgiving, and a man who found himself saddled with an impossible spouse, or a burdensome family, might have seen wife selling as the best option available for him. She might be sick or severely disabled, mentally unstable, stubbornly unwilling to conform to gender roles, or simply too difficult to control. Remember, birth control was not widely available until the 20th century, so a wife who refused intercourse could effectively doom the marriage. Alcohol often played a part, with many sales taking place after bouts of heavy drinking, and the ritual itself becoming a sort of drunken spectacle. In extreme cases, a husband might sell his wife in a fit of rage, or to settle a gambling debt. But what if there was a third option? A way to end a marriage publicly, theatrically, and with a measure of community approval? What if you could put your unwanted spouse up for sale? Welcome to my channel, and today we are exploring the bizarre and largely forgotten world of wife selling in England. A decidedly unromantic transaction that saw tens of thousands of British women bought, sold, and given away. Between the late 1600s and early 1900s, our story begins in an age when love matches were becoming increasingly common. But formal legal recognition of those unions lagged behind. Marriage in the eyes of the law was still very much a contractual and economic arrangement, especially for women whose status was inextricably tied to men. Across England, Scotland, and Wales, a distinct subculture of wife-selling developed. A highly ritualized practice wherein a husband effectively put his wife up for sale in a symbolic ceremony designed to end their union. The would-be seller would march his unwanted spouse through public spaces, sometimes adorned with a ribbon or halter around her neck, before handing her over to a new partner. This bizarre procession was witnessed by the entire community, who acted as judge, jury, and executioners of sorts, legitimizing the union's dissolution through their collective gaze. The woman might have been led through marketplaces, pubs, or even the street corners outside her own home. Once the transaction was complete, the former husband washed his hands of any further responsibility, freeing himself from his marital obligations. He might even use the occasion to publicly warn townspeople to withhold any future dealings with his ex-wife, shielding himself from potential debts or But while societal norms were shifting, the legal avenues for dissolution remained restricted. English law provided only 3 grounds for divorce: adultery, cruelty, and desertion. But the process was impossibly expensive and time-consuming. Couples had to petition Parliament, a costly and lengthy ordeal that drained both finances and emotional resources. As a result, only the wealthy elite could afford such separations. For everyone else, particularly the working class, there was little recourse but to endure. Yet couples found ways to circumvent the law. While the custom has undeniable roots in earlier European traditions of pawning or pledging wives as part of local customs, it is unclear exactly how or why it took hold in Britain. But how exactly did it work? Who were the participants and what were their motivations? But what of the women? Did they have any say in the matter? Unfortunately, it seems that many did not. As for the proceedings themselves, there was considerable variation in how wife-selling played out. So how did people react to this curious practice? While some commentators denounced it as barbarous and cruel, others viewed it with amusement, even delight. However, by the mid-Victorian era, public awareness of women's rights began to grow, spurred in part by the tireless activism of figures like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the sisters. Today, the idea of wife-selling seems both bizarre and grotesque, but it must be understood within the social context in which it occurred. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing.